The air on the barren planet trembled with the sound of incoming ships, a low hum that sent shivers down the spines of those who could hear it. From the sky, dark silhouettes began to descend, their engines roaring in the distance, growing louder by the second. The alien mercenary fleet had arrived. These were no ordinary soldiers. These were the most feared mercenaries in the galaxy, hunters known for their ruthlessness and unparalleled efficiency. Their reputation was built on swift victories and unmerciful tactics, hired by a shadowy intergalactic corporation with one sole objective: wipe out a human colony on the distant planet of Solara. The mercenaries had no interest in negotiations, no desire for peace. Their mission was simple: total annihilation. There was no room for mercy in their minds, no second thoughts. The people of Solara had no idea what was coming for them. As the mercenary ships landed, the ground beneath them shook with the impact. The colony, a small but proud group of humans, was nestled deep within a vast desert valley, its structures made of reinforced metal and stone. It wasn't much, but it had withstood the elements and thrived. Until now. The mercenaries disembarked, their armored exoskeletons gleaming under the harsh sunlight. They moved with precision, a well-oiled machine of destruction. Their weapons, long-range plasma rifles and anti-personnel grenades, clinked against their suits as they marched forward, weapons raised, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of resistance. Their commander, a tall alien with dark, reflective eyes, signaled his troops to fan out. "No survivors," he ordered, his voice cold and emotionless. The mission was clear. There would be no prisoners today. But as they advanced deeper into the colony, a strange feeling began to settle over the mercenaries. The colony's defenses should have been weak, easily overrun by their superior firepower. But there was something different about this place. It felt off. Suddenly, the first signs of trouble appeared on their radar. A series of strange, irregular signals flashed across their screens. The commander paused, his eyes narrowing. The signals were coming from all directions. Normally, this would be the signal for retreat or to call in reinforcements. But no reinforcements were coming. They were here to finish the job, and they would do it alone. The signals were strange, unlike anything the mercenaries had encountered before. They weren't just the usual signs of an ambush or hidden traps. These signals were more coordinated, more organized. For a moment, the commander considered turning back, but then the thought passed. He was not going to let a few unexpected signals stop the mission. He motioned for his troops to continue forward, their weapons aimed at the nearest building. But something was wrong. The soldiers moved through the colony, cautiously scanning every corner, every shadow. The humans, expected to be hiding in fear, were nowhere to be seen. It was too quiet. The whole place felt empty, like the calm before a storm. The commander barked orders to his troops, pushing them forward with even more urgency. He had no time for hesitation, no time for doubt. "Find them. Kill them all," he commanded. But the unease lingered. It wasn't just the quiet of the colony that felt strange. It was the feeling of being watched, of being followed. The mercenaries couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking, waiting to strike. And then the first shot rang out. It was a high-pitched crack, echoing across the valley. The mercenaries froze. The shot wasn't aimed at them, but it was enough to get their attention. Another shot followed, and then another. Each one sounded like a warning. Suddenly, the air was filled with a series of sharp, rapid noises. The mercenaries turned in all directions, their weapons ready, but they saw nothing. Then, without warning, a series of holographic figures flickered into view around them. The images of soldiers, human soldiers, appeared, each one perfectly camouflaged by advanced cloaking technology. The mercenaries reacted instinctively, their plasma rifles raised, their sensors scanning for targets, but they couldn't see them. The humans were invisible. The commander's heart raced as he realized the situation was much worse than he had anticipated. The signals weren't just distractions, they were part of a plan. The humans weren't retreating. They were preparing. And as the mercenaries slowly began to realize the full extent of what they were facing, a single human voice echoed through their communication channels. Ready, set. The voice was calm, steady, yet it carried a chilling edge of certainty. Now, in an instant, the ambush was sprung. The colony erupted in chaos as the cloaked human soldiers revealed themselves, launching a series of devastating attacks on the mercenaries. Explosions rocked the ground as hidden mines detonated, sending a shockwave through the mercenary ranks. The alien soldiers staggered back, disoriented by the sudden onslaught. The mercenaries tried to regroup, but the humans were everywhere. Armed with advanced AI-driven strategies, the humans moved with lightning speed, attacking from all angles, always one step ahead. The mercenaries, despite their superior weaponry, couldn't match the humans' tactical brilliance. A series of blasts erupted from the shadows as human drones, equipped with advanced weapons, streaked through the air, targeting the mercenaries' weak points. The alien forces were in chaos. Their shields flared with each hit, but it wasn't enough to protect them from the rapid-fire onslaught. The commander's heart sank. What was happening? How were the humans managing this? They were supposed to be weak, unprepared. And yet, they were handling the mercenaries like amateurs. Then, in the distance, the commander saw it. A flash of movement. A human soldier, barely visible behind a mound of debris, emerging with a strange glowing device. The soldier raised it to their chest, and suddenly, a high-pitched sound filled the air. The alien mercenaries' weapons began to malfunction, their targeting systems shutting down as the electromagnetic pulse scrambled their technology. The commander cursed under his breath. His troops were being picked apart, one by one, and they couldn't fight back. With his heart pounding in his chest, he finally understood. They weren't fighting a colony of helpless civilians. They were facing a force unlike any other. This wasn't a battle for survival. This was a fight for victory. And as the first wave of mercenaries fell to the ground, the commander knew it was only going to get worse. There was no turning back now. The humans had prepared for this moment, and the mercenaries were now caught in a deadly trap they never saw coming. In the distance, the rest of the fleet loomed, still unaware of the true scale of the situation unfolding on the ground. They had come to eliminate a threat, but what they didn't know was that the real threat wasn't the colony, it was the humans themselves. And the humans were ready. The air was thick with tension as the first shots rang out. Echoing through the deserted colony, the alien mercenaries, fully prepared for the annihilation of this weak human settlement, charged into the heart of the battlefield with weapons raised and armor gleaming. They had been briefed on the mission: wipe out the humans, secure the area, and move on. The mercenaries knew their technology, their tactics, and their power. They were certain of victory. But what they didn't know was that these weren't ordinary humans. The colony might have seemed like an easy target, but the resistance they were about to face would change everything. As the mercenaries advanced, the first wave of attacks hit them like a thunderstorm. Explosions erupted from the shadows, sending alien soldiers scrambling for cover. For a moment, confusion swept through the ranks. The humans weren't retreating. They were fighting back, and they were doing it in a way that no one could have anticipated. The mercenaries paused, scanning their surroundings. Their advanced technology, which normally gave them a clear advantage, was failing them. The humans had some sort of cloaking technology, making them nearly invisible to their sensors. The mercenaries could hear footsteps, the whir of drones overhead, but they couldn't pinpoint the source. It was like fighting shadows. A sudden burst of light appeared behind the mercenaries, and before they could react, a group of cloaked human soldiers materialized out of thin air. Their weapons blazed, cutting through the alien ranks with deadly precision. The humans were fast, too fast. The mercenaries' advanced targeting systems struggled to keep up. Each time they locked onto a target, the human soldiers vanished, only to reappear somewhere else in an unpredictable burst of light. The commander's frustration grew. These weren't the tactics of the helpless humans they had been told to expect. This was something entirely different, something that made him question everything he thought he knew about warfare. The human soldiers weren't fighting with brute force. They were fighting with intelligence, with strategy, with cunning. Above them, robotic drones zoomed through the sky. Their sleek, metallic bodies shimmered as they scanned the battlefield, launching coordinated strikes with incredible accuracy. Plasma bolts tore through the air, striking down alien soldiers as they tried to take cover. The drones moved with precision, their movements almost like they were anticipating the mercenaries' every move. It was as if they had an edge that the aliens couldn't comprehend. The alien commander's mind raced. How were they tracking them? Their cloaking devices should have been impenetrable. Their systems should have been flawless. And yet, every time they moved, the humans seemed to be one step ahead. Their weapons hit their targets with unthinkable precision. It was like they knew exactly where the mercenaries would be before they even moved. The mercenaries regrouped, but it was clear they were losing their advantage. Their numbers, their firepower, their technology, they weren't enough to overwhelm the humans. These humans were skilled, resourceful, and well-prepared. They weren't fighting like civilians. They were fighting like warriors. In the midst of the chaos, the mercenaries began to realize that they weren't just facing an ordinary enemy. The humans weren't struggling to survive. They were making calculated moves, using every ounce of their technology and every bit of their training to strike at the mercenaries with unrelenting force. The mercenaries were stunned. Another explosion rocked the battlefield, sending a shockwave through the ground. The mercenaries scattered, trying to find cover, but it was too late. A group of human soldiers emerged from the shadows, their faces masked by advanced helmets that reflected the light in eerie patterns. They moved with military precision, flanking the aliens from both sides. One soldier, crouched behind a wall, aimed his weapon and fired a burst of energy directly at the mercenary commander. The shot hit its mark, knocking the commander back, but he quickly regained his footing. His eyes narrowed in disbelief. This was no ordinary battle. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting to win. And that made them far more dangerous than he had anticipated. Despite the shock and confusion, the mercenaries regrouped once more, trying to adapt to the humans' unpredictable tactics. But every time they attempted to counter, the humans were already gone, vanished into the shadows, only to reappear in a new location, always out of reach. The mercenaries were beginning to feel the pressure, their confidence starting to crack. The alien soldiers were skilled in combat, but this wasn't the kind of battle they were trained for. They were used to overwhelming enemies with superior numbers and advanced technology. But the humans were proving to be a different kind of foe. The mercenaries had underestimated them. Suddenly, the sky above them was filled with a swarm of drones, descending from the clouds like a storm of metallic insects. The drones fired a series of targeted missiles, and the mercenaries scrambled to react. But they were too late. The explosions rocked their ranks, sending them into disarray. The commander struggled to regain control of the situation. His soldiers were scattering, their coordination faltering under the relentless pressure of the human assault. The mercenaries had been trained to handle chaos, but this was something else. The humans were moving faster, thinking faster, adapting faster. It was as if they had anticipated everything the mercenaries would do. In the heat of the battle, the commander realized something that sent a cold chill down his spine. The humans weren't just fighting to defend themselves. They were fighting to turn the tide. Every move they made, every strategy they employed, was designed not just to survive, but to win. The mercenaries were outmatched, and they were starting to realize it. As the dust settled and the battlefield grew quieter, the commander stood in disbelief, surveying the aftermath of the first clash. His troops were battered, their weapons malfunctioning, their morale shattered. The humans, though outnumbered, had inflicted far more damage than the mercenaries had expected. The commander clenched his fists in frustration, knowing that this was only the beginning. The humans had sent a clear message. They were not the weak, helpless targets the mercenaries had been told about. They were a force to be reckoned with. And the mercenaries were about to learn just how far the humans would go to defend their home. The battle, once so sure of its outcome, had become a nightmarish spectacle for the alien mercenaries. The constant barrage of explosions, the deafening sounds of energy weapons clashing in the air, and the relentless assault by the humans, all of it was taking a toll. The mercenaries had come here expecting a swift, brutal victory, but now they were caught in a struggle they had never anticipated. The humans were everywhere, fighting with unyielding resolve. The Special Ops soldiers had not just adapted to the situation, they had turned the tide in their favor. They moved like shadows, appearing from nowhere, striking with precision, then disappearing just as quickly. Despite their relatively small numbers, the humans were proving to be an overwhelming force. They fought like soldiers who had something to lose, not like the desperate civilians the mercenaries had been briefed to wipe out. In the midst of the chaos, the mercenary leader, Vorath, stood atop a hill overlooking the battlefield. He was a towering figure, his armor scratched and scarred from countless battles, but there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. His usually cold, calculating expression had softened, replaced by uncertainty. Vorath had led mercenaries in battles across dozens of planets, taking down armies far larger and more powerful than the humans he now faced. But something about this fight was different. These humans were not like any enemy he had ever fought. They didn't break under pressure. They didn't panic when their defenses were breached. In fact, they seemed to grow stronger the longer the battle raged on. For the first time in his long career, Vorath felt a twinge of doubt. He watched as one of his soldiers was taken down by a sudden burst of energy, a human soldier appearing from nowhere and firing in a flash of light. The soldier went down, but the human soldier was already gone, back in the shadows, ready to strike again. How are they doing this? Vorath muttered to himself. His eyes scanned the battlefield, trying to understand how the humans were staying one step ahead. Their tactics were too organized, too well planned. These were not the disorganized, panic-stricken forces he was used to. The humans had a strategy, one that seemed to be working. He looked over to his commanders, his face hardening. "We need to regroup," he said, his voice low but urgent. "We've tried everything, Vorath," one of the commanders replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "They keep adapting. Every time we think we have them, they vanish, reappear somewhere else. We can't track them. It's like they know our every move." Vorath's mind raced. He could feel the shift in the air, a growing unease among his troops. These mercenaries were used to being in control, to overwhelming their enemies with superior technology and firepower. But here, on this planet, they were outmatched. The humans had turned their world into a battleground, and they weren't backing down. "Form a defensive perimeter," Vorath barked. "We'll regroup and reassess our strategy." His orders were met with swift compliance, but even as his troops gathered, Vorath could feel the doubt creeping into their ranks. The humans were relentless, and no matter how many times the mercenaries tried to push them back, the humans kept coming. They were everywhere, crawling through the shadows, using their cloaking technology to slip past defenses and launching coordinated strikes that left the mercenaries reeling. As his soldiers positioned themselves behind cover, Vorath's gaze fell to his trembling hand. It was slight, but the tremor was undeniable. His grip tightened around his weapon, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had been in battles that seemed impossible, but none like this. The humans weren't afraid of him, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He took a deep breath and steadied himself. "Focus, Vorath," he thought. "You've faced worse. You've seen worse. But this is different." His mind flashed to the faces of his fallen comrades, soldiers who had been taken down by the relentless human assault. He knew they had underestimated their enemy, and now it was costing them. But there was something more, something that gnawed at him. The humans, though vastly outnumbered, had fought with such purpose, such conviction. There was a fire in their eyes, a determination that made them almost unstoppable. As Vorath surveyed the battlefield, a deep unease settled in his stomach. This wasn't just a battle for survival for the humans. This was a fight for their very future. And it was becoming clear that they were willing to do whatever it took to win. The mercenaries, on the other hand, had no such sense of purpose. They were here for pay, for profit, and their confidence was built on the assumption that they were always the superior force. But the longer they fought these humans, the more they realized that their enemy was not motivated by fear or survival. The humans were driven by something far more powerful: the will to protect their home. The humans were everywhere, fighting with unyielding resolve. The Special Ops soldiers had not just adapted to the situation, they had turned the tide in their favor. They moved like shadows, appearing from nowhere, striking with precision, then disappearing just as quickly. Despite their relatively small numbers, the humans were proving to be an overwhelming force. They fought like soldiers who had something to lose, not like the desperate civilians the mercenaries had been briefed to wipe out. In the midst of the chaos, the mercenary leader, Vorath, stood atop a hill overlooking the battlefield. He was a towering figure, his armor scratched and scarred from countless battles, but there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. His usually cold, calculating expression had softened, replaced by uncertainty. Vorath had led mercenaries in battles across dozens of planets, taking down armies far larger and more powerful than the humans he now faced. But something about this fight was different. These humans were not like any enemy he had ever fought. They didn't break under pressure. They didn't panic when their defenses were breached. In fact, they seemed to grow stronger the longer the battle raged on. For the first time in his long career, Vorath felt a twinge of doubt. He watched as one of his soldiers was taken down by a sudden burst of energy, a human soldier appearing from nowhere and firing in a flash of light. The soldier went down, but the human soldier was already gone, back in the shadows, ready to strike again. How are they doing this? Vorath muttered to himself. His eyes scanned the battlefield, trying to understand how the humans were staying one step ahead. Their tactics were too organized, too well planned. These were not the disorganized, panic-stricken forces he was used to. The humans had a strategy, one that seemed to be working. He looked over to his commanders, his face hardening. "We need to regroup," he said, his voice low but urgent. "We've tried everything, Vorath," one of the commanders replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "They keep adapting. Every time we think we have them, they vanish, reappear somewhere else. We can't track them. It's like they know our every move." Vorath's mind raced. He could feel the shift in the air, a growing unease among his troops. These mercenaries were used to being in control, to overwhelming their enemies with superior technology and firepower. But here, on this planet, they were outmatched. The humans had turned their world into a battleground, and they weren't backing down. "Form a defensive perimeter," Vorath barked. "We'll regroup and reassess our strategy." His orders were met with swift compliance, but even as his troops gathered, Vorath could feel the doubt creeping into their ranks. The humans were relentless, and no matter how many times the mercenaries tried to push them back, the humans kept coming. They were everywhere, crawling through the shadows, using their cloaking technology to slip past defenses and launching coordinated strikes that left the mercenaries reeling. As his soldiers positioned themselves behind cover, Vorath's gaze fell to his trembling hand. It was slight, but the tremor was undeniable. His grip tightened around his weapon, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had been in battles that seemed impossible, but none like this. The humans weren't afraid of him, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He took a deep breath and steadied himself. "Focus, Vorath," he thought. "You've faced worse. You've seen worse. But this is different." His mind flashed to the faces of his fallen comrades, soldiers who had been taken down by the relentless human assault. He knew they had underestimated their enemy, and now it was costing them. But there was something more, something that gnawed at him. The humans, though vastly outnumbered, had fought with such purpose, such conviction. There was a fire in their eyes, a determination that made them almost unstoppable. As Vorath surveyed the battlefield, a deep unease settled in his stomach. This wasn't just a battle for survival for the humans. This was a fight for their very future. And it was becoming clear that they were willing to do whatever it took to win. The mercenaries, on the other hand, had no such sense of purpose. They were here for pay, for profit, and their confidence was built on the assumption that they were always the superior force. But the longer they fought these humans, the more they realized that their enemy was not motivated by fear or survival. The humans were driven by something far more powerful: the will to protect their home. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Vorath could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His soldiers were faltering. Their confidence was shattered. The once unshakable belief that they were the best in the galaxy was slipping away. There was something unnerving about how the humans fought. They weren't just reacting to the mercenaries. They were anticipating their moves, outsmarting them at every turn. The mercenaries were used to taking the initiative, but now they were always a step behind. Vorath, one of his lieutenants, called out, his voice shaking with fear. "We can't keep this up. We're losing men. They're everywhere. We can't track them." The commander's voice was full of disbelief, and Vorath felt a pang of frustration. He knew what was happening. His troops were losing faith. They were starting to see the humans not as weak, but as a formidable force. Vorath took another deep breath and forced himself to steady his nerves. This was his battle to win or lose. He had to find a way to break through. But with every passing second, the humans were proving that they weren't just fighting for their survival. They were fighting to win. And that was something Vorath hadn't been prepared for. The mercenaries were losing confidence, and Vorath knew that unless he turned the tide, their mission would end in failure. What was once certain victory had turned into a war of attrition, and for the first time, Vorath wondered if they were the ones who would be wiped out. The question lingered in his mind as the battle raged on. Was this really a fight they could still win? The battlefield was chaos, an endless exchange of fire, explosions, and the relentless clash of technology. The alien mercenaries, despite their superior numbers and advanced weaponry, were starting to falter. The humans, though vastly outgunned, had not backed down. Instead, they fought harder, smarter, and with a fierce determination that kept the mercenaries on edge. At the heart of the human resistance was Lieutenant Bonner, the leader of the Special Ops team. He was everything his troops needed: calm, composed, and unwavering. In the face of overwhelming odds, he was the steady hand that guided them forward. As the battle intensified, Bonner knew that if they were to have any chance of winning, they would need to take the fight to the mercenaries in a way that would shake their confidence to the core. Bonner looked up at the sky, his eyes scanning the distant horizon. He knew it was time to strike. The orbital bombardment systems that had been secretly set up on the planet's surface were ready. With a single order, the sky would light up with devastating precision. The mercenaries had no idea what was coming. He took a deep breath and activated the command. Within seconds, the first wave of missiles shot into the sky, racing toward their target. From the ground, it looked like streaks of fire cutting through the atmosphere, heading straight for the mercenary command center. The explosions rocked the battlefield, sending shockwaves through the alien forces. The blast radius was enormous, and the mercenaries' central command was obliterated in an instant. The mercenaries staggered. Their communication systems were crippled, their coordination shattered. For the first time, they were thrown into disarray. Bonner knew that this was their moment. They had to strike while the mercenaries were vulnerable. The human soldiers moved quickly, launching a counteroffensive with the kind of speed and precision that could only come from years of training and a burning desire to protect their home. The cloaking devices that had once been used to ambush the aliens were now used in tandem with their advanced AI systems to anticipate enemy movements. The mercenaries, still reeling from the bombardment, were unable to react quickly enough. But despite the tactical advantages the humans had gained, the battle was far from won. The mercenaries regrouped quickly, their own advanced tech allowing them to recover faster than expected. They pushed forward once more, undeterred by the destruction around them. The humans, though, were not going to let up. They had come too far, and their resolve was stronger than ever. Then came the moment that would define the battle. And for many, it would be the turning point. Lieutenant Bonner was leading the charge, rallying his team as they advanced through the thick smoke and rubble. His eyes were sharp, his focus absolute, but even he couldn't predict what was about to happen. As they moved forward, a sudden burst of laser fire lit up the air. Sergeant Bowers, one of Bonner's closest allies, fell to the ground, struck directly by a laser blast. The battlefield seemed to freeze for a moment. Bowers had been a friend, a brother in arms who had stood by Bonner's side through countless missions. To see him go down, in the midst of this battle, was a blow that cut deep. Bonner knelt beside his fallen comrade, his heart heavy with grief. Bowers had been a part of his team since the beginning, and losing him now was almost too much to bear. But Bonner didn't have the luxury of mourning. He felt the grief, yes, but it was quickly replaced by something fiercer. Rage. The mercenaries had just taken one of his own, and they would pay for it. The soldiers around Bonner were shaken, their faces filled with sorrow as they looked at their fallen comrade. For a brief moment, there was hesitation, but Bonner's voice cut through the fog of grief. "This is for him," Bonner said, his voice a low growl. His eyes were filled with a mixture of grief and fury, and the soldiers could see the fire burning in him. "We don't stop until they're gone." The words rang out across the battlefield, and the soldiers, though devastated, found new resolve in their leader's command. They would avenge Bowers, and they would make sure that no one else would fall before the mercenaries. The humans, fueled by their fallen comrade's memory, launched back into the fray with renewed strength. Every step they took, every strike they made, was driven by the promise of vengeance. The cloaking devices and AI strategies now worked in perfect harmony. The mercenaries, once so confident in their superior technology, were being overwhelmed by the relentless onslaught. But it wasn't just the tactics that were making the difference now. It was the humans' sheer willpower, their refusal to back down. Bonner led them with unflinching resolve, his heart hardened by the loss, but his focus sharper than ever. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something far greater. They were fighting for each other, for their fallen comrades, and for the future of their people. As the battle raged on, the mercenaries began to realize that they were no longer the dominant force. The humans had found their stride, and they were not going to be stopped. The once feared mercenaries were now struggling to hold their ground. The tables had turned, and there was no turning back. In the midst of the chaos, Bonner paused for a brief moment, his gaze sweeping over the battlefield. The humans had suffered losses, yes, but they were still standing. They were still fighting. And in that moment, Bonner knew one thing with certainty. The humans would never give up. The mercenaries had underestimated them. They had thought that they could easily crush these weak humans, but they had made a fatal mistake. The humans had something the mercenaries could never comprehend, the strength of their spirit, and that strength was about to win them the day. With a final, furious push, the humans surged forward, their morale sky-high. The mercenaries, shaken by the relentless counteroffensive, began to retreat. The humans were no longer underdogs. They were the victors. Bonner's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the mercenaries fall back. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck back and turned the tide of the battle. As the last of the mercenaries withdrew, Bonner allowed himself a brief moment of relief. But he knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. For now, though, victory was theirs. And that was all that mattered. The battle had raged on for hours, and the once confident alien mercenaries were now visibly shaken. What had started as a mission of assured victory had slowly turned into a desperate struggle for survival. The mercenaries, renowned for their ruthless efficiency and advanced technology, had underestimated one crucial thing: the unyielding will of the human soldiers. Vorath, the leader of the mercenaries, stood at the front lines, his eyes scanning the battlefield. His usually composed expression was now etched with frustration and disbelief. His troops, once a relentless force, were now faltering. One by one, they were falling, either killed or incapacitated by the relentless onslaught of human firepower and tactics. The humans were not like any enemy the mercenaries had ever faced. They fought with a fierce determination that was impossible to break. Every time the mercenaries thought they had the upper hand, the humans would strike back harder. Vorath's gaze shifted across the battlefield, his hand clutching his weapon tightly. His pulse quickened. The human soldiers weren't retreating, they weren't faltering. They were closing in, and despite the loss of their comrades, they fought with everything they had. The battlefield was littered with the fallen, but the humans continued to push forward, undeterred by the chaos around them. This was a fight for survival, but it had become so much more. It was a fight for their home, for their loved ones, and for a future that they would protect no matter the cost. And as Vorath stood there, watching his forces struggle, he realized that they were fighting something far greater than just soldiers. They were fighting the very spirit of humanity. Vorath had seen many battles in his time as a mercenary leader. He had led his forces through skirmishes on countless worlds, and each time, victory had been swift. His troops had never been defeated in battle, and their reputation as invincible warriors had been well earned. But this time was different. The mercenaries had underestimated the humans. They thought that, like every other world they had conquered, this one would fall quickly. The humans, though, had proven to be resilient, resourceful, and relentless. They fought with a unity that came from their shared humanity, a unity that the mercenaries couldn't understand. As the battle continued, Vorath's mind raced. He had to make a decision, one that went against everything he had ever known. His men were breaking, their morale shattered, their numbers dwindling. They were no longer fighting as a unified force, but as a group of individuals trying to survive. Finally, with a heavy heart, Vorath made the decision that no one had thought possible. He ordered a retreat. The command rang out over the communication system, and within moments, the mercenaries began to fall back. The once proud warriors, who had charged into battle with confidence and arrogance, were now retreating in disarray. The humans watched in stunned silence as the alien forces pulled back, moving toward their ships in a panicked scramble. For the first time in the battle, the humans saw their enemies running, not in fear, but in defeat. The tension in the air was palpable as the humans tried to process what they were witnessing. Had they really won? It seemed impossible. The alien mercenaries, known throughout the galaxy for their ruthless efficiency, were retreating in the face of a few hundred soldiers. It was a moment of surreal triumph, but the humans could not fully celebrate. The cost had been immense. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of their fallen comrades, and the grief was overwhelming. Every victory came with a price, and they had paid dearly for it. But even so, they had won. They had held their ground, and the mercenaries, who had once believed they could wipe out humanity without a second thought, were now fleeing. The humans, though exhausted, stood tall. They had survived. Against all odds, they had fought back and turned the tide. The mercenaries, despite their superior technology and numbers, had broken. The human spirit had triumphed over all the alien forces could throw at them. Vorath's retreat was not the end of the battle. It was the beginning of a new chapter. The humans had proven that they would never surrender. They had faced an overwhelming force and had stood their ground, pushing back against impossible odds. And as the mercenaries retreated into the darkness of space, the humans knew that they had earned something far more valuable than a victory on the battlefield. They had earned respect. As the mercenaries boarded their ships and lifted off, Bonner and his team stood amidst the wreckage. The once feared invaders had been driven away, but there was no time for celebration. The cost was too great, and the victory was bittersweet. The loss of their comrades would be felt for years to come, but their courage would be remembered forever. Bonner's eyes swept across the battlefield, taking in the destruction and the brave soldiers who had given everything for this moment. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity's spirit would never be broken. And as the last of the mercenaries disappeared into the stars, the humans knew one thing for certain. They had fought not just for survival, but for the future of their people. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over, and they were ready for whatever came next. The battlefield was eerily quiet now, save for the distant hum of the alien ships retreating into the stars. The victory was undeniable, but the price of it was heavy. The human soldiers, though standing victorious, were broken. They had fought with everything they had, pushed beyond their limits, and now they stood among the wreckage of their enemies and their fallen comrades. The alien mercenaries who had once seemed invincible were now fleeing, but for the humans, there was no time for celebration. The battle was over, but the cost of survival was written in the faces of the soldiers, in the silence of the air. Bonner, the leader of the Special Ops Unit, stood at the front of the battlefield, his gaze locked on the grave of Sergeant Bowers. His best friend, his closest ally, had fallen just moments before victory had been secured. The memory of Bowers' death weighed heavily on Bonner's heart. As he stood there, the sky above him was filled with streaks of burning starships, the remnants of the once formidable alien fleet. The battle had left its mark, not just on the land, but on Bonner's soul. The soldiers had won, but it was not a victory they could easily savor. Every inch of ground they had gained had been paid for with blood. The dead lay scattered around them, human and alien alike, and the cost of this victory was apparent in every face. Some soldiers sat, exhausted, staring at the horizon. Others were kneeling by their fallen comrades, saying silent goodbyes. The emotional toll was immense, far beyond what anyone could have expected when the battle had first begun. But Bonner remained standing. His eyes were tired, but filled with a fire that had never been extinguished. The loss of his friend had shaken him, but it had also hardened his resolve. The humans had proven their worth, not just to the alien mercenaries, but to the galaxy. They were not a species to be taken lightly. They were survivors, and they had just sent a message to the universe that no one would soon forget. The camera zoomed out, offering a sweeping view of the battlefield. The once pristine land was now littered with debris, broken alien ships, and the remains of battle. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the weight of the day's events. In the distance, the alien fleet limped away, their ships barely functioning after the relentless human onslaught. They had underestimated humanity's determination, and now they were fleeing, not because they had been defeated by superior firepower, but because they had encountered something far more dangerous, the human spirit. As the final moments of the battle unfolded, the scene shifted to the surviving human soldiers. They stood tall, their silhouettes outlined by the setting sun, a powerful image of defiance and resilience. Despite the losses they had suffered, they stood together, unbroken. Their uniforms were torn, their bodies battered, but their spirits were intact. They had faced an overwhelming enemy and had come out on top. This victory was not just a military triumph, it was a statement. It was a message sent to the galaxy, to all who would dare underestimate humanity. Never again would they be seen as weak. They had faced down the most deadly mercenaries in the galaxy and had sent them running. And they had done it together. Bonner turned to face his remaining soldiers, his expression grim but proud. He spoke to them with the authority of a leader who had earned their respect, who had led them through hell and come out the other side. His voice, though worn, carried the weight of everything they had fought for. "We may be small," he said, his words carrying across the quiet battlefield, "but we are powerful. We are human. The soldiers, despite their exhaustion, stood a little straighter at his words. There was something in the way he said it, something that made them believe that, no matter what happened next, they could overcome anything. They had faced death, they had fought for their lives, and they had won. And it wasn't just because of their weapons, their tactics, or their technology. It was because they had something no mercenary force could ever understand: heart. They fought not just to survive, but to protect what was theirs, to protect each other. Bonner's words echoed through the soldiers' hearts as they looked at each other, some nodding, others clenching their fists in determination. Their resolve was unbreakable. The battle may have been over, but the war was far from finished. There were still countless threats in the universe, still enemies who would test them, but they were ready. They had proven their strength. The camera panned one last time across the battlefield, showing the faces of the survivors. Some were wounded, some were still in shock, but all of them were standing. And in that moment, the victory felt not just like the defeat of a foe, but like the birth of something greater. Humanity had been tested, and it had risen to the occasion. As the last of the alien ships disappeared into the distant stars, Bonner and his soldiers looked out over the destruction. The silence was deafening, but there was a quiet pride in the air. They had fought as underdogs, and now they stood victorious. Their message was clear: humanity would never back down. The soldiers stood together, their silhouettes cast in the fading light. The sun set on the battlefield, and the stars above twinkled with the promise of a future still unwritten. The galaxy would never forget what had happened here. The humans had shown that no matter how powerful an enemy seemed, they could be overcome. The human spirit, once underestimated, had proven to be an unstoppable force. This was only the beginning of humanity's journey. The galaxy had seen their power, and now it would never forget.